Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's your boy, Spring-Heeled Jack Slack. Fights Gone By, episode 39. Coming at you on Monday morning, and it's a glorious day here in England. Sun's out, birds are singing, so you find me in a good mood. There were some fights over the weekend, some glory fights which I haven't finished watching yet. Struggled to even really motivate myself to watch those because it was Rico Verhoeven against some guy I'd never even heard of. The plight of heavyweight kickboxing is getting more and more dire by the day. But there was also Bellator 179, which I did watch all of. Some of it wasn't great, but the main event and the co-main event were, so we'll be touching on those later. But let's get started with the news, because it's all kicking off this week. The UFC is doing a fighters retreat. I can't remember where it is, probably Vegas. But they've got all their fighters in one place, and they're surprised that shit's kicking off. Cyborg Justino punched Angela Magana in the face, knocked one of her teeth out apparently, and split her head open, and now the police are involved. Cyborg Justino, who can't get in the ring because she keeps getting into trouble. The weird part about this was that my reaction when I heard it was, what's Angela Magana doing at a UFC retreat? I assumed that she wasn't in the UFC anymore, because even when she was in the UFC, she hadn't won a professional fight since 2011. Yeah, you know when they brought Michelle Waterson in and they were desperate to start her push, they put Angela Magana in against her. Angela Magana was already on a 3-fight losing streak going back to 2011. So it was getting a little bit suspect then, but I'm astounded that she's still in the UFC now. But that really just reflects how shallow those divisions are at the moment. Elsewhere at that retreat, Kobe Bryant did a speech where he encouraged all the athletes to unionise, which you got to think they asked Kobe not to talk about when they booked him to speak there. But props to him. And then someone else, can't remember who, I think it was one of the coaches from TriStar Vancouver or something like that, was escorted out for saying that the Reebok deal sucked. Which is interesting to think about, because while whenever asked about it, everyone has always said it sucks, it's sort of gone quiet over the last sort of year. Not really enough people complaining. I was having this yesterday. I was thinking, do you know what I really miss? Colourful shorts. And when you say that, like, if we were still in the colourful short era, and I said we're changing to black and white shorts, some of us, maybe even me, would have been like, who cares? You know, we're watching the fighters, not the shorts. But once you've had fight after fight after fight, where it's just black with white stripe versus white versus with black stripe, you get really bored. You know, this sport is supposed to be about individuals, and you know, from Cro Cop to Anderson Silva, to Shogun's tighty whities to Fedor's short shorts, you know, you recognise fighters by what they wear and what they preferred to wear. You know, we all remember George St. Pierre for the compression shorts. The one time he didn't wear them, it was the time he lost to Matt Serra. So there was the curse of the board shorts. But we recognise fighters for what they wear in the ring. It's Tito Ortiz's flame shorts, Takanori Gomi's flame shorts. Genki Sudo had a new interesting pair of shorts every fight. Kid Yamamoto paid artists to design his shorts, and they always looked awesome. I think it was his tattoo artist that did his shorts. But yeah, it really makes a difference, and you know, it's just crazy because if Reebok produced a pair of Anderson Silva shorts or Cro Cop shorts, you know, legacy wear, they would sell instantly. But who the fuck is buying the Reebok stuff that's just black and white or primary colours? Well, at any rate, other news. GSP will face the winner of Maia versus Woodley. That Bisping fight's off. I don't know if we touched on that last week, but apparently that's off. But, you know, you never know what to believe. GSP at the moment is becoming the equivalent of that one friend who keeps saying that they're in town, let's do something this weekend. No, wait, actually next weekend. No, actually, and you just like, fucking get on with it. But he's also sort of like one of those people that you just kind of want to go away now. I mean, I'll watch Maia versus GSP or Woodley versus GSP quite happily. A lot more happily than I would watch Michael Bisping versus GSP in a weight class that GSP had never competed in. Whereas welterweight, he's one of the greatest of all time. Well, yeah, fairly safe to say he is the greatest welterweight of all time in terms of accomplishment. If you go into skill, it gets more complicated, and then people get butthurt about it. I had this with Demetrius Johnson this week. Other news, Rings, the Japanese promotion, which booked a lot of Nogueira's early fights. Fedor came through there. They had loads of guys, Ricardo Arona, TK, Volkan, yeah, we were talking about him last week, fucking love Volkan. But it was a pro wrestling company that turned into a fight company in Japan, and when the Rings division was absorbed into Pride, well, Pride really just bought out their fighters, but Randy Couture went over there when he was, I think he'd just won the UFC title, and he was like, I want to go test myself, immediately got arm locked by Enson Inoue, which was very strange. But yeah, Rings is coming back in 2018 apparently, and they're going to focus on heavyweight tournaments, where there is no talent outside of the UFC. Maybe you could get Vitaly Minikov to come in and steamroll some Japanese middleweights like Manoa Man who are fighting up at heavyweight. Someone asked me if the UFC should bring in an absolute division the other day, and I was like, for all intents and purposes, heavyweight is absolute. You know, in boxing, heavyweight is actually absolute, but the 265-pound limit, most human beings are going to be able to make that. There's no bottom limit on heavyweight, so, you know, everyone is free to go up and fight heavyweights. It's just they don't, because there's no incentive to, because you're just going to get murdered. Whereas in Pride, certainly the early days, you know, there was no place for someone like Kazushi Sakuraba, who was, well, nowadays we reckon he could probably make it like welterweight, but there was no place for a guy like that in those days. It was just various matches, no real weight limit, and then when they did the tournaments, he got in on those too. Open weight stuff, just, I don't really like it. I mean, occasionally I love it in grappling. You know, seeing a guy like Marcelo Garcia routinely run through guys who have 30, 40, 50 pounds on him is amazing. But equally, I'd rather see what guys can do against guys of their own size and not risk as many injuries, shortening their careers by taking beatings from heavyweights. You know, Derek Lewis is not as skilled as, say, Luke Rockhold or anyone like that, but if he lays on top of them and starts hitting them in the head, you know, that's going to take some years off their life. Anyway, that's the interesting news for this week. Let's talk about Bellator 179, which happened over the weekend. This was in London. I was thinking about going to see it. Then when MVP dropped off the card, I was like, yeah, I'm not even going to bother looking for last-minute tickets. There are now only 2 fights I care about. Standard MVP, really, the old bait and switch. Well, it was bait and switch originally when they said, oh, we're getting Paul Daley and MVP, or they've got beef, or we're going to London, what's going to happen? And they were like, actually, Rory Macdonald's going to fight Paul Daley, which, more interesting fight, to be honest, but then somehow MVP ended up getting matched with a lightweight coming off a loss. But, you know, that's just the standard Coca treatment for Michael Venom Page. And the vast majority of this card was hard to watch. You know, these guys are much better than the average guy you'll find in your gym or academy or whatever. But still, the level on display was, for someone who watches things like the UFC regularly, the level of the undercard and even the first end of the main card was really obviously low. There was a fight where a guy hit a duck under, and the other guy was trying to guillotine him from this duck under where he could never possibly guillotine him, and they were stuck in this standing position for about 5 seconds before they fell to the mat. And you're watching it going, that's never going to happen in the UFC. Kimbo Slice's son, Kevin Ferguson Jr., Kimbo Slice Jr., whatever they want to market him as, won his fight by knockout. Wasn't particularly interesting. You know, people were saying he's getting better, but it was watching it and going, that's stuff that shouldn't be working there and wouldn't work against a guy with more experience and ability. You know, he knocked the guy out by running at him with shifting punches, and the left hook caught him on the end of his reach. You know, if the guy were moving properly or had his guard up properly and wasn't running slowly backwards with his chin up in the air, probably wouldn't have worked. And he did it twice at the end of the fight too. Anyway, the good stuff was Rory Macdonald versus Paul Daley and Linton Vassell versus Liam Mcgeary. Now, this fight was interesting to me. I think I said this last week, but I certainly said it in an article at some point. I think, did I? I can't remember. Well, anyway, this was interesting to me because Paul Daley's been like in exile for the last few years, and while he has picked up some losses in that time, he's been getting better, it seemed. And then he gets in there with Rory Macdonald, and we get to know what he can do against a guy with real strong takedowns, real strong top game, and the stand-up to trouble him as well. And that was very clear immediately when Rory Macdonald came out, jabbed. They both jabbed at the same time, and Macdonald immediately countered Daley's jab with a right straight to the head. Shot in on a takedown, got the single leg, and I did a commentary for this, which you can check out on the YouTube channel, but I was like, oh wow, Paul Daley's doing well here. He was just hopping around for ages on one leg, and as soon as I started saying it, he was taken down. And the whole first round was Macdonald tripoding in Daley's guard, looking to get the can opener, the double collar tie from inside the guard, standard George St. Pierre position, standard Jackson's MMA position actually as well, but a very good position to start smothering the other guy's hip movements and opening up with elbows. But he was looking for that, and Paul Daley was hand fighting with him, and then he just dropped an upward elbow straight through the middle from 6 to 12 in Daley's body. Up elbows on the ground, really cool. BJ Penn was advocating them in his whatever his book was called with Victory Belt years ago, and you don't really see it much. It's because your weight's not, it's not dropping your weight into the blow, but it can just sneak straight up the middle, and that's an angle that guys don't think they have to deal with from within the guard. Same thing with like uppercuts from the guard or mount even. But he connected a couple of those. Most of the time he was just going into, I think BJ Penn called it friendship position, but if you're familiar with guys like Josh Barnett, it's tripoding up on your feet and putting your head underneath the opponents. I had a good friend who said that there's not many problems in grappling you can't solve by putting your head underneath the other guys and putting weight on it. And it showed its ability there. He just kept tripoding up, looking for the grips. And Daley doesn't use a lot of submissions from his back anyway, but he certainly wasn't troubling someone with the posture and grip control of Macdonald. So all he was going to be looking to do was like opening his legs, maybe getting the knee shield in, and then trying to escape up to his feet, technical stand-up, or move to the fence. So whenever he opened his legs, even for an instant, Macdonald's knee snuck through and he started passing. And then when Daley started shoulder walking back to the fence when Macdonald was tripoding on him, Macdonald just walked around, pivoted around Daley's shoulders and just turned them both around so they were facing the middle of the cage again. It was brilliant. You don't see that a lot, but then that's really a strategic decision there, because if you compare like Yair Rodriguez's guard with Paul Daley's, Paul Daley pretty good at getting back to his feet, especially if he's got the cage there to help him. Yair Rodriguez, happy to be on his back, very aggressive guard, doesn't really get up from his back that often, doesn't wall walk that much. In his fights, he's been about, I'm going to attack from the bottom until the other guy backs up and lets me stand up, or falls off me and I end up on top of him. So compare like Edgar in that fight to Macdonald in this fight. Edgar crumpled Rodriguez up against the fence, didn't let him extend his hips, didn't let him shoot triangles or go for arm bars. He just, and when Rodriguez did, it was an easy guard pass because there was so much space. But in this fight, Macdonald didn't have to worry about the submissions from the guard and wanted to be in the guard, putting his weight on Daley, smashing him with short elbows if he could. So he just turned him away from the fence, and it was no problem at all. Really cool. But the whole first round seemed to be Macdonald not so much opening up with strikes, but making Daley work. He'd pass the guard, and then Daley would have to bump and turn back into him, and then Macdonald would like go back to the half guard and then pass again. And it was just, what you saw was Daley was constantly having to work, but he was achieving very little with it. Like, he got the lockdown and he got double underhooks from half guard, whipped up to his side, which is where you want to start coming up or sweeping from, and all he achieved was to push back to closed guard. And as soon as he did it, Rory just elbowed him in the face. So he's doing these big movements, and every moment of success is only really putting him slightly less at a disadvantage. So really disheartening first round for Paul Daley in that respect. Second round, Macdonald comes out. Daley immediately tries the Brennan Ward knee, the Groenhart special. Macdonald immediately gives ground, counters with another right hand that catches Daley clean, throws up a high kick. Not sure if it caught him on the wrist or whatever, but it looked like it smacked his head a little bit. And then as soon as Daley starts throwing back, Rory's in on his hips, and it was perfect. It's like we talked about with Edgar a few weeks ago. That anticipation, understanding that, okay, now he thinks we're boxing. And then that's when you get the hips. And when you see it work well, it's beautiful. It's like the guy knew exactly what his opponent's intentions were. Someone was telling me that in Street Fighter there's a name for it, like Street Fighter competitions. It's called like yaoi or something, or unagi in Friends. But like being able to anticipate the opponent's intention. And you saw it here, and you saw it in Edgar's fight with Rodriguez. It was like he could go, okay, he thinks we're boxing now, and then drop on the hips. And it's so good when you see it work. And then the pass came instantly this time around, knee cut immediately into side control. Daley started turning away. Macdonald dropped some elbows from an angle he couldn't see from, which is really bad, on the side of Daley's head. Daley turns back into him, gets mounted, technical mount with one knee up, which is sort of moving towards the back. It's the thing you do when guys are getting on their side. And then the choke came easy, and it looked like Paul Daley wanted out of there because he just tapped almost immediately. Macdonald didn't have the hooks or anything. But, who can blame him? He was in a fight where 7 minutes in, he'd done nothing. Absolutely stellar showing from Rory Macdonald. People are going to be like, Paul Daley is not a top-tier welterweight now, but he's a very dangerous welterweight. And I think people were forgetting how good Rory Macdonald is. People are now like, oh, he's on the way out, because he looked so disheartened against Stephen Thompson, because he couldn't cut the ring on him, couldn't get him into position. And to be fair, I don't think I've seen anyone cut the ring on Thompson well recently, or, since that Matt Brown fight, which, he could have won on some scorecards. But, Macdonald still showed that he had Damian Maia's number. I mean, Maia wasn't doing as much stuff trying to climb on the back along the fence back then. He was really using his passing a lot more. But Woodley, the exact same game that stifled Stephen Thompson, that come to me on the fence and then I'm going to start swinging off it and then duck on your hips or whatever when you step in, that looked completely ineffective against Rory Macdonald. He absolutely had Woodley's number for his A game. He walked him to the fence, he attacked him with long kicks to the body, which Thompson couldn't do because the very first kick he threw at Woodley in the first fight along the fence, Woodley immediately stepped in, caught it and took him down. And then you didn't really see him kick much against the fence for the rest of the two fights. But Macdonald was happy to kick him in the body, dig for the underhooks as Woodley ran in trying to keep a hold of the leg, and then fight him off. And then if Woodley did come swinging off the fence, which he did, he does like this stutter step run thing, which catches some guys out, but it's quite a long movement. And Rory was just ready for it. He'd shoulder roll off the right hand or whatever, and then he'd come back with his combinations, or he'd put the elbow in the way of the face. Rory completely had Woodley's number in that fight. And that's not to say that Woodley hasn't changed at all, but Woodley is still using the stuff that Macdonald came in and showed the best answer to I've seen so far. Regardless of where you stand on how he'd do against Maia or Woodley today, it's pretty hard to dispute that Macdonald is a top 5 welterweight. Anyone in that division, in the top 5 of that division, can probably beat each other on any given day. But he's top tier, and the UFC made a mistake letting him go, I feel, or not coming to terms with him. It looked like he didn't have a lot of sponsors on his shorts, and neither did Daley in this one. But Daley did have bodybuilding.com, which is a fairly huge brand, and Rory had Monster, who are doing like a mini series of fights with Bellator in a couple of weeks, I think, and that it's like 4 fights and none of them are important. But it's interesting that Monster are getting so involved. I wish Bellator all the best with this, because their welterweight division is looking great, and their light heavyweight division is looking great. I feel like it's started happening a lot more nowadays. Like, guys are getting back into that supporting a specific organisation mentality. So, like, if you say anything bad about Bellator, they'll be like, "Oh, you're a Zuffa zombie," or a UFC shill or whatever. And then you'll be like, "But I also say bad things about the UFC," and they'll be like, "Oh, it's just cover for your shillness." But I struggle with guys who support fight organisations like their football teams. It's not Bellator FC Football Club. It is actually Bellator FC. That was a terrible example. Bellator FC stands for Fighting Championship, like Pride FC. But, you're not supposed to support the organisation. You're supposed to support the fighters, and the organisation is going to be paying them. It's very strange being like, oh, I prefer Bellator. I mean, you're allowed to prefer Bellator to the UFC, but acting like one of them is faultless is hilarious. At any rate, I wish them luck in these good things. I shit on them when they do stupid things. One of the not stupid things they did was put Linton Vassell versus Liam Mcgeary on this card. I didn't even remember that Linton Vassell was British, but he's from Milton Keynes, home of the Concrete Cows and the only town in the UK on the grid system. Motherfucker. And I can't remember where Liam Mcgeary's from, but I love Liam Mcgeary. His interviews are hilarious. But this was a really interesting fight because Vassell, when I was watching this, I was like, that's very catch wrestler. Catch wrestling-y. A lot of the stuff he's doing. You know, as far as styles go, dividing things into Sambo, BJJ, catch wrestling, I'm not a fan of that. Grappling is just grappling. All these guys train with other guys who train in other disciplines of grappling all the time. But there's some things that you can see from like a catch wrestling tradition that you don't see so much in sport BJJ. But he's doing these things, and I'm like, that's very catch wrestling-y. That's very Neil Melanson. And then I realised Neil Melanson's in his corner. And then I go and Google it, and he's been working with Neil Melanson for a couple of years now. But Neil Melanson's instructionals and book are amazing. The guy has a brilliant approach to things. Can't remember what he has. He has some kind of... I'm not going to say neurological disorder or anything like that, because I don't want to be misquoted, but he has some kind of health difficulties, and he was like he mangled one of his toes at one point, and the recovery time was so long that he was just like, amputate it, and they did. Like, he's just a nutter, loves to be on the mats, but really interesting guy with really interesting approaches to technique, with like an MMA mindset towards grappling. So he does tons of stuff from the half guard, because you can hold the guy down. And that's not really a concern in like jiu-jitsu competition, because the guy will just go, I'm in guard now, I'm going to use my guard. He's not going to get back up most of the time, because if you get points for the takedown, that's just threatening, risking getting taken down again. Anyway, so Vassell he took Mcgeary down with very little difficulty, never postured up, he was in close guard for ages, and then Mcgeary opened his guard to try and make something happen, and Vassell immediately stepped over his knee, went to half guard. Mcgeary got the lockdown in, but throughout this fight, you will notice that Vassell was using like shoulder pressure. So he was holding across the back of Mcgeary's head, either reaching into the far armpit or just using his shoulder to turn Mcgeary's head. But while reaching across the back of Mcgeary's head, he was looking for, if Mcgeary was getting his hands in front of Vassell's face, Vassell would catch his wrist, but with the hand behind Mcgeary's head, and then lock up the Americana grip, loop his elbow so that it freed Mcgeary's head, and attack the Americana. Did that from half guard in the first round. Mcgeary had to open his guard, turn onto his side to relieve the pressure, and Vassell just stepped straight into mount. One way to deal with the most dangerous guard in the light heavyweight division, certainly the most aggressive guard in the light heavyweight division, and not always the most pass-proof, but he is always going for stuff. But that, you don't see the Americana much. The one I can remember is John Jones versus Vitor Belfort, which was he'd battered Vitor Belfort at that point. Vitor Belfort was at that point where Vitor gets to, where he's like, I just sort of want to lay down, and where he starts pulling guard and stuff. But the other one I can think of is from the bottom of the sprawl, some guy locked up like a reverse Americana-y thing, not a Kimura, but an upside down grips, because they were facing north-south. Can't remember which fight that was. Very cool though. But they're almost never threatened properly, and Vassell threatened 3 or 4 in this fight. First round ended with him almost applying an Americana. But the other thing that was cool was that was if the wrist got in the way when he was reaching behind Mcgeary's head. But if he could open Mcgeary's elbow without the forearm getting in the way, he would feed the hand that went behind Mcgeary's head into the armpit, and that sets up what's called a stockade. It's a form of neck crank where you have both control on both shoulders, but I suppose it's a form of stockade. But the idea is that you get your fist or even your wrist into their far armpit, and you straighten your arm out, and it crumples their neck up, and then you dismount and walk around them to apply pressure to their neck. Really old school catch wrestling move. And if you read my articles on Minoru Suzuki, I did 2 of them. I think the first one, the brutal catch wrestling techniques or the brutal catch wrestling of Minoru Suzuki on Fightland, has a beautiful clip of him doing this to some guy, and the guy's head just about pops out. You're like, oh, that could have gone bad. But the commentators in this Bellator fight were like, why is he dismounting? That's very strange. But it was because he had this grip and he was trying to walk around and do it. He threatened it twice, which was quite cool. But those 2 techniques, like looking for the Americana and looking for that stockade, eventually they worked out so that Mcgeary bumped and rolled away in a weird way, leaving his elbow open, and Vassell just dived into his armpit, caught up the arm triangle choke, and then did another thing that Neil Melanson talks about on one of his instructionals. Neil Melanson likes to lock the guy's hips to you when you're doing the arm triangle. If you watch like Ryan Hall's arm triangle series, which is absolutely stellar, he teaches how to walk around and generate more force and tighten up the choke, whereas Melanson is worried about guys rolling away or kicking their legs up and grabbing underneath their leg with their arms. If you've ever seen that defense, basically when you're in arm triangle, you kick your legs up, catch behind them lock your arms, and then use your like a leg press to pull some space between your shoulder and neck. But yeah, so that's why Melanson likes guys to lock themselves to the other guy. And you saw it in this fight. Vassell put himself in half guard. Like he starts dismounting perfectly. He could have windshield wiped his feet, got off, but instead he just places his right ankle in the guard of Mcgeary and kicks it all the way through when Mcgeary locks it up. So he gets the tap, and I thought it was a really cool performance. I mean, Linton Vassell, I watched a lot of his fights coming up to Dynamite when I was doing a big preview of all the fights in the tournament. And it was very sort of like basic take down, get the mount, maybe throw some punches, then they turn their back, then you get the rear naked choke. But in this one, he looked like he was happy to be on top, wasn't opening up with strikes, was just staying low, never giving Mcgeary space. I mean, Mcgeary did escape out the back door from mount at one point, and he had some success, like scrambling, but he was always on his back, scrambling out of bad positions rather, but he was always on his back. And Vassell just kept the pressure on him, never postured up, kept his shoulder like driving down into Mcgeary's midsection, was almost always like getting up on his toes to put some pressure through him when he needed to. It was interesting, but I loved it. Great fight. Love both those guys. Bellator should be really pushing that more because those guys are really interesting. I'd love to see them both in with the UFC guys. Regardless of whether they deserve it, just because it's a nice way of Bellator being like, look how good our guys did, or whatever. So if you haven't seen Bellator 179, should I start doing star ratings for events like Dave Meltzer? I'd say this is like a 2-3 star event. It wasn't anything special, but the co-main and main were very, very good. I really enjoyed those, even though both were a little bit one-sided. It was cool to see technical stuff. It was like watching both guys put on a technical clinic of the stuff that they like doing. Elsewhere, the sumo's still going on. If you're not following the what are we in? The May Hon Basho, definitely worth a look. Harem Ifuji has looked unstoppable this season or this tournament, which is bizarre because he's like the most run down, beat up, and old, or well, fight aged of all the Yokozuna. Hakuho is undefeated this tournament, has hit some lovely throws, but he keeps falling over like immediately as he does them, and like the other guy's hand will touch the floor first, and you're going, oh, you're playing fast and loose here, Hakuho. Kiseno Sato has lost a few, which is weird, but he's probably still injured from that nasty shoulder injury he suffered in the last basho. And Teruno Fuji has been pushed out a few times, but has also deadlifted dudes out with overhooks, which is fucking awesome. I put a gif of it up on Reddit, and they loved it. If you haven't seen that, go watch it, because Teruno Fuji might not be like as technically brilliant as someone like Hakuho, but he's so strong. Like, you know, even if he weighs 400 pounds, it's still a feat to pick up a resisting 300-pound man and carry them out of the ring. There's been some real like gasp moments as guys have been pushed out into the crowd this season. Harem Ifuji and his man fell right through into the front row, both of them. Harem Ifuji is such a gent, he actually like stops guys at the edge and you know, pulls them back up and says, okay, that's enough now, even though he's like a demon in the from the actual get-go. He's butting people like crazy. There was a really headbutt heavy fight earlier on. I think it was day 8. Can't remember who it was, but the guy just kept giving him the nodder every time the other guy stepped in. It was brutal. But it's crazy how, like, various techniques come to the fore in different bashos. Kotosha Giku became the first Japanese guy to win a basho in over 10 years by getting the grips on the belt and doing the bumpity bump, they call it. Like, he just pushes and jumps into the guy. Like, he looks like a frog with his little knees pointing out. He just jumps into them, gently bumps them out of the arena. But, like, he's been almost hopeless for the last 2 bashos. And this basho, it seems to be like nobody's gripping the belt at all. They're just shoving with the palm strikes. Hakuho is still throwing dudes, though. I mean, Hakuho is incredible. He gets the outside grip on the belt and he'll just turn guys into the floor. So that's what was going on this weekend. You still got time to join in on the basho. You know, there's Kinta Miyama does like 10-minute videos every day that you can watch the recaps of. There's a couple of other guys. Jason's All Sumo channel. There's an English guy whose name has escaped me at the time of now. But there's tons of guys you can watch these through. And definitely get involved. It's a great sport. Even though it's like 500, 600 years old, it's perfect for the ADD generation. You know, each bout is like 30 seconds. Right, let's do some questions. Hi Jack, big fan of your writing and love the podcasts also. My question is about the low guard of McGregor and how he gets away with it. All other coaches seem to teach a high guard religiously, yet Conor competes at a world-class level with his hands by his waist. Is it a matter of distance management that is aided by his long stance allowing for quick linear movement? I have noticed that he will push fighters away from him, so is it a case of staying completely out of punching range, coming in with a punch, and then making sure to stay out of exchanging range by pushing the opponent away? Also, is there any benefit to low hand placement, avoiding the arms getting tired, drawing a punch that he can counter, ? All the best from Callum. That was one of those questions that the nerd at school used to do, where he'd ask a question but deliver all the right answers within the question so that the teacher could go, very good, Callum. Spot on, Callum. That's it's exactly that. Distance management is the most important thing to being able to fight with your hands down. You know, high guard generally, there's no problem with using a high guard all the time. I mean, if you've got the shoulder stamina to do it for a grueling fight, you know, at least you know you're always safe. The advantages of a low guard are, of course, energy conservation. If you're throwing your hands from low guard, it means that they're coming in from a slightly different angle. You know, it's not like crazy angles, but it is going to be slightly different to deal with. A lot of guys find that they feel they can throw a bit harder if they drop their hands to their waist. Sorry, not their waist, their chest level. Gene Tunner used to talk about that. I think I can feel it on the bag, but like I haven't ever done any measurements, so I don't know if there's any truth to that. It might well be because you're starting from a more relaxed position than if you're holding your arms up. The main real advantage for a counter striker from a hands low stance is that your hands are now in the way of your body, which is one bonus, but also your head is unguarded, which is what you want if you're a counter striker who works at distance. You want guys to aim for your head. It's basically, you know, in chess you make sacrifices of pawns and stuff like that. You know, you have to give something away sometimes to get something back. And, you know, McGregor lands hard punches clean because he draws guys in and makes them extend for him and reach. And that, again, is to do with being just on the edge of the distance where they feel like they can just get in and hit him if they really reach, and then just opening that distance up a little bit more so that they fall short. And he's absolutely astonishingly good at it. You know, it's something he's been practicing his whole life. A lot of it is making people think that they can swing at him and then not letting him. Pushing fighters away, yeah, he does that a lot too. He doesn't tend to he's not a guy who really excels in exchanges. He does better when he's setting up his left hand and landing it clean. He's not a particularly right hand heavy puncher. His jab looked a lot better in the second Diaz fight, and he can use it if he's like drilled into him. But even in the second Diaz fight, he started forgetting about it, and his corner were just screaming for it. Please jab, stop throwing the left hand, and he was still throwing the left hand. Now the hands low stance, generally considered a lot more dangerous and flashy than it is. If you fought a regular sort of fight with your hands that height. You know, if you were in exchanging range for long periods of time, or if you were fighting from within some guy's reach, that would be dangerous. It's more that you're fighting a different sort of fight. So you're establishing a longer range. You're being on the end of the reach and saying, look, come to me, I promise I won't step back, and then stepping back and countering. It's considered flashy, but like, if you compare it to something like the Ali Shuffle or something like that, which is just pure flash, very little application, having your hands low it's not at all just flash. It is something that has tremendous application, and you'll see there's generations of boxers who did it, generations of fighters in every sport who did it. It's that having the bait out there in order to land the counter punches. You don't typically see guys who go to their opponent and are fighting on the inside or something like that, coming in with their hands low. They tend to be the guys who keep their hands up and then get in close and start unloading with both hands. The other thing is that the hands generally, whether you're punching or kickboxing or wrestling, if you're using your hands, that's a fairly late line of defense. What you really want to be doing is denying the opponent the position where they want to do their thing. And that's your first line of defense. And your head movement is there too if you're striking. And not only your head movement side to side and pulling straight back, but you can duck in and smother the opponent. You know, there's a ton of things you can do without having to use your hands. The hands up stuff. There are fights where Conor McGregor gets his hands up, and there are fights where his coaches beg him to get his hands up, like the second Diaz fight. But if you're not hanging around, you can normally get away without having your hands up. It's more like a safety thing, you know. It's you wear your seatbelt every time, even if you're not expecting to crash, because the one time you do, you know, you want it there. But yeah, I mean, I think this is something that every coach, you know, even the coaches you're talking about that teach religiously the high guard, understand the low guard stuff and why it works. But also, a lot of coaches don't want to have to deal with trying to teach a guy an attribute-based game like hands low and trying to keep distance perfect when it just won't help them out at all. If you were transposing like the standard boxing style, or you know, if you were trying to put a standard boxing style together, the hand slow style would probably not be part of it. You would want guys who are relatively safe at all times, even if it means they don't have the big counters always opening up as easily. Cheers, Callum. It's your boy, the Neil Seary of Seldom Asked Query, the Michael Bisping drinking session of unanswered questions. Ross, that is a good introduction, Ross, well done. Hey Jack, love the show, yada yada yada. Could you briefly sum up all the main reasons people switch stances? I remember you saying that Jones fought most of his fight against Cormier's southpaw to prevent him from getting his preferred left leg for the high crotch takedown. What are the reasons for other fighters to switch stances? In particular, what are Dillashaw, Overeem and Michael Venom Page trying to achieve? From what I can work out myself, the benefits of switch stance are greater ability to feint, decreased chance of eating low kicks, and greater ability to ring cut. Any answers? Blah, 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 blah. From Ross, obviously. There are a lot of reasons to change stances, and I think that the important thing that we touch on here is that everyone's unique, and that is why whenever I hear someone say, oh, he can fight equally well out of both stances, I think, no, he can't. No one can. Unless you've only got like two techniques from each stance, then that's not the case. Some of them are more obvious than others. The one I always think of is Pat Barry. Whenever he switched into southpaw stance, you knew the left high kick was coming, and whenever he was orthodox, he'd start throwing the right low kick. You know, and then when he went southpaw, he'd throw the looping lead hook, and when he went back to orthodox, he'd be throwing right overhands. Yeah, you know, you can sort of see guys how they work from each stance. Dillashaw almost always switches to throw the left high kick again, but there's a lot of values to it. I mean, in a panic, if you've had the shit kicked out of one of your legs, you can change stance. Like John Jones did, when he was dealing with Daniel Cormier's favourite high crotch. You know, anytime he was caught too close to Daniel Cormier and his left foot was forward, he'd just step back into a southpaw stance as soon as DC started reaching for him. And then he fought a lot of that fight from the southpaw stance anyway. You know, some guys like specific angles. Prince Nazim, he used to switch to southpaw he'd backhand a southpaw jab down the inside of the opponent's glove, and as soon as they came back at him, he'd lean back and throw the right hook. the other one that he really liked on offense, which became basically his whole game by the end. If you compare his fight with, what was his name, Steve Robinson, where he uses left stance, he goes orthodox and southpaw, both square and bladed, and then he goes feet level and fights with him with his feet level at one point. He shows all 5 of Brendan Ingle's stances, and he looks absolutely sublime. Then you compare his later fights to that, and it's just him looking for that corkscrew right uppercut over and over again. But that's a really nice little technique. McGregor does a variation of it, which is just like a regular uppercut, but Marvin Hagler loved it too. But if you southpaw stance or open guard, whatever, southpaw stance against an orthodox fighter, you lean out the window to your right, you throw the uppercut like a straight underhanded punch with your right hand as you hop so that your right foot is past their left foot, and hopefully the punch comes in under their armpit, lifting their head up just as you're coming onto line to throw the left straight with the right foot outside of their lead foot, which is a lovely little angle. And Prince Nazim's knockouts, a great many of them came from either that uppercut or the uppercut setting up the left straight. But again, like another nice angle is that Hennenbrau 2, TJ Dillashaw did a nice thing where he kept going to the he'd throw like a loose floppy right hand from his orthodox stance, like darting out to his left, and he'd hit a switch 45, which is where you step out to your left and then bring your right foot in and go into an orthodox stance, like moving forward on a 45. But he'd do that, and then from that angle he'd throw the right-handed jab. He did a lot of nice southpaw jabbing coming down the inside angle. This is all a lot easier with GIFs. I will do something on this at some point, I promise, Ross. But cheers for the question. Right, let's hit up the Facebook thread where we've got a quickfire Q&A going on. Ian asks, how is Cody a favourite over TJ? For some reason I feel like TJ should be a heavy favourite in that fight. I like TJ in that fight because he's probably not had to use just one method over and over again as Cruz did. Cruz looked a little bit lost once it seemed like he couldn't get a hold of Cody, and Cody wanted him to come to him. But I also think TJ is more likely to trade with Cody, who is the big hitter, who has the crisper boxing probably. So I think it's a higher stakes fight in that regard. There's more chance of TJ getting hurt in that fight than there was for Cruz. Cruz, he did get up and he went immediately back to work, but he was always working at that pace that he does where he's on the outside and he's trying to pick up the points. It's never like I'm going in to try and knock this guy out, whereas TJ does get into that mindset. But then I don't know anything about odds makers, and a lot of the time the odds are affected by people betting. So, if you think you can make some cash on it, by all means go for it. I mean, the one I always tell, old Slacky's betting story, is that I got Mark Hunt at 3-1 against Czech Congo. Maybe at the time people thought that Mark Hunt was useless because he was just starting his comeback, but Czech Congo only was going to be able to strike with him. Czech Congo, God, if you saw Czech Congo's fight the other night, he pushes people to the fence, drops on the double leg, and then just kneels there, like for as long as he can. He's the most boring fighter I've ever watched. Yeah, odds makers, generally silly. Maya or Woodley, I can't do that quickly. That's going to be a long one. I'll write that later. Rose beats Joanna for the title, do you agree? Don't know, but I do love Rose. She's hilarious. The clip of her and Holly Holm and Valentina Shevchenko at ringside is absolutely brilliant. She looks baked out of her mind. Sorry, those were from Kevin and Victor, respectively. Stuart says, while I was watching the JJ fight the other week, Joanna Jacek, I thought I saw opportunities for her to throw some uppercuts while the retreating Andrade was running onto her. While retreating / Andrade was running onto her. For this reason, I was having flashbacks of Gray Maynard versus Frankie Edgar. That was a good uppercut. Would this have been a good or bad idea? The good rule for uppercuts is if the guy's leaning forward, you can really hurt him with an uppercut. Another good rule for uppercuts is generally you don't want to go with them if there's a good chance that the guy's going to hit you with a left hook. You start throwing the right uppercut. That's the longest, of the basic punches, that's probably the longest that side of your jaw is going to be unprotected while you're throwing the uppercut, looping it out and bringing it back. Dozens of knockouts that you can name of guys getting left hooked while they're right uppercutting. Maybe, what was his name? Razor Ruddock versus Tommy Morrison. Muhammad Ali ate left hook after left hook while trying to reach down for Joe Frazier in their first fight. But equally, George Foreman hurt Joe Frazier with the uppercut. they are an interesting pairing off. But if you've got other options, like the left high kick she kept looking for, and just letting the left hook fall short and then coming back with counters, it's probably safer to stick to those. You know, in boxing, you have to try and negotiate that window. You have to say, he's leaning forward, you might get hit with the left hook, but we're going to try and time the uppercut on that split second. If you've got all the techniques available to you in mixed martial arts, maybe not a great idea if all the other girl is throwing is left hooks, which was literally the case. Matt says, assuming Kane comes back healthy, is he the last challenge from Miocic? Who else is left? Now you got some up-and-comers. You got Ngannou, who people are crazy about. Derek Lewis. Stefan Struve. You could run the rematch with Arlovski. No, I don't know. To be honest, by that point, Daniel Cormier might go back up to heavyweight. I'd love to see him run through that division now that Kane's not there anymore. Chris says, where can I watch the sumo live online? Oh, I don't know. I think you'd have to find a stream of the NHK channel or whatever it is. Is that a channel? I think that's a channel. Or is that like the initials of the North Korea? But yeah, I normally just catch up on Kinta Miyama or Jason's All Sumo channel. Floyd asks, why don't we see more Muay Thai style foot sweeps / trips when guys have their kicks caught in MMA? Do you think they would be useful in an MMA context? I think one of the things that that gets overlooked when we talk about this is that a lot of MMA fighters come straight from wrestling backgrounds, and they have a lot of experience standing on one leg, hopping around, while the other guy tries to catch or kick out their other leg. You know, it's a situation where guys are really good at that, and they're also going against guys who maybe haven't been as practiced kicking out legs because they're coming from wrestling backgrounds too, or whatever. I think there's a lot of potential for it, but also most times if you are holding a leg and you kick out the opponent's other leg, you are ending up standing in guard over them, and there's not an awful lot of value to that compared to like a proper takedown. Foot sweeps from the clinch, would love to see more of those, like the Sasai, Surukomiyashi, whatever it is. Any sort of one where you're moving the opponent and blocking their foot or just sweeping their feet out as they move. Love those. Machida hits some lovely ones of those, but they're a great way of bypassing the guard. Matt Brown had gorgeous foot sweeps from the clinch. Actually, a really good example of that catching kicks thing is Frankie Edgar's fights with Benson Henderson. He caught a load of kicks, but he never came near to that back leg because Benson Henderson is such an experienced wrestler. And obviously he was a bit longer than Frankie too, but he was just hopping around forever. Do you prefer palm up or palm down throwing hooks? Palm up. Wow, that'd be hard. I think I prefer palm down personally, but I find myself slipping into both. Like, you know, it's a lot of it is comfort. As long as your wrist is aligned and your fists clenched, you should be okay. Sometimes I even like the old palm outward, Fedor style ones. Does GSP get bumped in front of Maya? That's from Jake. God, I hope not. Aaron asks why you disagree with Ami MMA and face it 7 or 8 times. I think I said in a previous episode that I'm not a huge fan of amateur MMA because there's not, you know, it doesn't have as many regulations on it. And to be honest, I'm part of like the school that says if you're going to get hit in the head, get paid for it, even if you're only going to get paid a bit. I think amateur MMA, as much as MMA is the Wild West, amateur MMA is even more the Wild West. You know, you could be some nobody taking their first amateur fight and suddenly they'll bring you in against some all-star wrestler without telling you. But amateur MMA is much like regional professional MMA in that regard. Just guys, promoters who own, managers who own their own promotion, putting their like prospect in against nobodies who they found. Like a lot of the time you see he's a freestyle fighter from an independent gym, which means he doesn't have a gym, against some young prospect. As a form of competition, by all means, amateur MMA, go for it. But amateur combat sports generally, I think fighters should be getting paid for fighting. Especially if they sell tickets. Oh, Angus says, which is more interesting to you, Macdonald versus Larkin or Macdonald versus Lima? Both. Why not both? I love both those fights because Douglas Lima, the only guy that we've seen in the UFC that we can measure him against is Ben Saunders, who he beat twice. Ben Saunders, very good fighter, who he beat twice by knockout. very decisive victories. And Larkin and Macdonald just never met up because that division's so deep in the UFC, they just never came together. So either would really excite me. I mean, I think you'd see... I don't know. I don't know. I give up on that one. That's a really good question. Right, running low on time here, so I'll skip ahead and we'll do our fight of the week, and then maybe I'll get the preview in later this week like I did with UFC 211. If not, I'll write a preview. Well, I'll write a preview anyway, but if you don't see a preview on this channel, go and read the preview on Fightland or Vice Sports, wherever they're putting me at the moment. So fight of the week, I've got two this week, which I really like. One is Andy Hug versus Jerome Lebanner. Goes to decision. Actually, they may have met several times. I'm going to check which one it is. Hold on. Oh no, they only met once. So it was in 1995, and it was Hug's 13th professional kickboxing fight. And if you haven't seen Jerome Lebanner, just generally, he was called the Hercules of K1 because he's enormous. I met him at, where was it? Glory 8, I think, in Tokyo. I was sat down the front, and he'd had his fight, and it was a sad old man fight, basically. But he came out, I didn't even notice him, and he came out and sat next to me, and he is gigantic. Like, he was there in a hoodie and the shorts that he'd fought in, which were like Thai-style shorts, just chilling in the front row. But yeah, really cool guy. But he is enormous, and Andy Hug is like muscly, but really like a puffed up light heavyweight or even middleweight by today's kickboxing standards. And the fight's really good. Andy Hug moves around the ring beautifully, throws nice kicks. Every time he goes for a spin, Lebanner, who's pressuring forward, steps back. So every time he throws the spin or feints a spin, Lebanner steps back and Hug steps through with the axe kick immediately after, and it cracks off Jerome Lebanner's noggin, and the commentators go, "Oh, Kakato Toshi," which I believe is heel drop. And then it was another one of those ones where Hug's kicking game opened up his hands, which weren't nearly as practiced or as crisp as most of the other guys in kickboxing. You know, he knocked Ray Safo out with his hands, but Ray Safo's a much better boxer. But yeah, so he's circling around the ring backwards, and he's just sneaking through these left hands as Jerome Lebanner is tensed up and expecting the round kicks. Great fight. You got to see touches of why Hug had so much trouble in that division. You know, he goes to the ropes, he puts his gloves up, and he gets wailed on and tries to run out the side as they're wailing on him. And that seemed to be like the extent of his defense. His defensive work was not good. But yeah, really awesome performance. Well worth a watch. And nice ring craft. Jerome Lebanner runs into the ropes several times past Hug, and gets very frustrated about halfway through. He starts being like, "Why aren't you standing in front of me?" Other fight of the week is Robson Moura versus Jeff Glover at ADCC. Can't remember which one it was, but it's the one that Jeff Glover won. And it's interesting because Jeff Glover is a guy who, years ago, he was like top flight contender. You know, he could have been like one of the very few Americans to win a world title in jiu-jitsu, or the Mundials, whatever they are. Mundials. You know, Abu Dhabi and places like that, he gave Leo Vieira and other great guys really hard times. And then people were begging him to consider MMA, but he just didn't like fighting, which is fair enough. But he's at the point in his career, or has been for a while, where he's got all these injuries. And so he just sort of like trains for fun and does fun things. And he sort of gives up position to set up submissions. And one of these things you hear that he's been working on lately is or in recent years, is he'll let guys pass and get a body lock on him to try and keep him in position, and then he'll use that to set up either the guillotine or the das. And in this fight with grappling match with Robson Moura, Moura is working to pass the guard, eventually grabs a hold of this body lock while he's passing, and then Glover shifts his hips out, wraps the head, gets the guillotine, uses his hooks to work his way back to guard, and submits Robson Moura from there. And Robson Moura is absolute tip-top level competitor. Very cool fight. Nice example of that thing that you're seeing from guys like Jeff Glover, Gary Tonnen, where it's not all about position, but getting the other guy to think so much about position opens up his neck or whatever to catch it for a submission. Anyway, wow, we've gone over an hour today, and I've still not done my preview. I am going to head off now. I might do a little short preview episode later in the week. Not a really great fight night this weekend, but Glover Teixeira versus Alexander Gustafsson. A couple of other names on there that should be fun. Ben Saunders, I mentioned him earlier. He's coming back. Might get that out later in the week. Patreon episode is coming this week, and I will catch you all soon. Sign up to the Patreon. Send your emails to fightscorebypodcast@gmail.com. I'm Jack Slack. Cheers.